G'day, I'm Yuki-san Dev, and in part 23 of the series Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will take our first look at getting the main camera to follow the player. Alrighty, so far in the series I haven't mentioned anything about the camera following the player. That's because there really hasn't been any call for it yet. In the game 1 that we made, the player was static, but the enemies and the background moved, so the camera stayed put. I've been tossing up whether to make a video on it or just tackle it as we go through each series because it is a rather large subject and each case is different. You would hardly ever get two developers using the cameras in exactly the same way. The scenarios really are endless. For the beginner, the difficulty starts to set in when you are moving with Rigidbody rather than transform, and or when you are turning the object and expect the camera to follow. There will be a lot more methods you will need to use in these cases. You'll start coming across things like quaternion, look at, damping, lerp, velocity, distance, normalization, and the list goes on. So I think what I'll do in this video is just do the easy child follows the parent way, a few basic scripts way, and the no script way using Cinemachine. So let's get into it. Okay, well, for starters, we kind of already know that a child of any parent in the hierarchy is going to go where the parent goes in the Unity world, right? Well, the camera in this respect is just another game object that if put under a parent, then it will follow it. So let's start with that. So I'm in a new 3D project and let's create a sphere in the hierarchy and call it player. And I'll do my usual reset transform, scale down to 0.5, and let's also add a rigid body. I'm also going to drag in one of my images that are in my GitHub, and the link for that is in the description, and apply it to the sphere. Alright, now I'm going to make a plane in the hierarchy as well and call it ground. And reset its transform. And I'm going to scale it up way bigger to 8. And move its Y to minus 0.25 so that the sphere is sitting right on top. And I'm also going to give that a texture too. And I think I'll just change the texture tiling here to 8. And I'm just going to move my camera a little closer to the player. Cool, so we're ready to go. So let's make a C# script and name it player and drag it onto the player in the hierarchy and open the script. Alright, so let's give this player basic movement with some code. We'll use the transform and the rigid body for this one. So this code will look something like in video 8 in the series, so I won't go through the typing of it today because it should all look pretty familiar. And I'm just trying to save on a bit of video time. But just quickly, I'll run through it. This line here are the variables to use when using transform to move the player. And this line here are the variables to use when we're going to use add force to move the player. The horizontal and vertical are to use with input manager for the access value. And then we set a storage container for the rigid body and assigned it in start. And we have the code in there to catch the player pressing the spacebar to jump using add force. And then lastly, we are moving with either transform or add force. For now, let's have add force remmed out and just use transform. So let's save this. And when we run this, we can move everywhere. Cool. But now we want the camera to follow us. So stop the game and drag the main camera onto the player object to make it a child of player. Now with the camera still selected, move it into the view we would like to keep. I'm just going to move my camera a little closer to the sphere and tilt it a little. Right, so the camera now is a child of the player, so when the player moves, so will the camera, and the camera will stay in the same position relative to the player as it is now. So let's play. Cool. That's following with the sphere and turning with the sphere. Now, if you wanted first-person view, you would just set the position of X, Y, and Z to the same as the player's position. In my case, because I reset my player's transform, it is simply 0, 0, 0. And play again. Cool. First-person view. Okay, so that wasn't so hard, was it? Well, no. But it's pretty limited because the camera is kind of bound by the player. It's probably fine if you stuck to using transform and kept it simple, but play around with it for a while with different movement techniques and you'd soon figure out its limitations. For example, let's get back into the player script and unrem the add force movement and rem out the transform movement so that we're moving using Rigidbody. And now save and run again. Ouch. Well, that's awful. Yep, the sphere is now truly rotating and rolling, so the camera goes with it. So the techniques for following are going to differ a lot depending on how you are moving the object to be followed. Alright, so now doing it in script is where the billion scenarios comes into place and a reasonable understanding of world space and further scripting jargon is needed. So let's just do a couple of simple things. So drag the camera back out of the player into the hierarchy so it's no longer a child of the player. And position it somewhere reasonable in the scene. And let's just quickly get back into our player script and re-enable the transform movement. And save. Now let's make another script and call it follow player. And drag it onto the camera. And open it. Alright, so first the camera needs a reference to the player's transform so it can follow it. No matter the technique or the scenario, the camera needs to know what it's following. So let's do public transform player. Okay, now to get the camera to move with the player, we can just match the camera's position and rotation to the player's position and rotation by typing in transform.position equals player.position. And transform.rotation equals player.rotation. And that's it. So let's save. And now click on the main camera and drag the player into the transform field that we just created. And run. Cool. Now this is first person view because again it's matching the exact position of the player. So the question now is, do you want third person or do you want some other view like top down or something else using offset values? Also when the player jumps, do you want the camera to jump too? Do you want the camera to turn with the player? All these scenarios require different scripting and techniques. There's far too many to mention in one video. So as the series progresses, whatever we come across we will solve. Unless, of course, I get some requests to do a video series just on camera stuff. So real quick, try this one. Go back into your player script and rem out the transform lines and re-enable the add force ones. And save. Then open your follow player script. Now in here, let's add a vector3 variable and name it offset. Then in start, type in offset equals transform.position minus player.position. Then in your position line in update, add offset to the player position. And also rem out the rotation line because that won't work with using this technique. So we have a container for a vector3 and it's named offset. Then in start, we set that offset value to be wherever you have the camera in edit mode. Then in update, the camera will still follow the player, but it will add the offset values each time to keep the same angle that you have in the editor right now. So let's save this. Now in the editor, move your camera to the position that you would like to see the player during gameplay. And press play. Cool. Camera keeps the same view while you move. So let's look at another way. So this one, the sphere will move in the directional rotation of the camera, but the camera will still follow the player. It's a little different. So let's click on the camera and disable the follow player script in there so it doesn't run. We're going to make a new script, so I just want to save confusion. Alright, create a new empty object in the hierarchy. I'm going to call mine camera bin. No idea why I'm calling it that, it's just all I can think of right this second. And reset its transform. Okay, now drag the camera onto it so that it's a child of camera bin. And now let's make a script and call it camera bin. And drag it onto camera bin. Alright, let's open the script. Alrighty, so we're going to actually use rotation on this camera bin and have the player follow the rotation. So let's do private float horizontal, and let's do a serialized field private float speed equals 60, and then public transform player. Alright, so our horizontal variable is our usual one that we use for the horizontal in the input manager. And our speed float will be used for our rotation speed. We're serializing it so that we can see it in the inspector just in case we need to change the speed. And the player transform variable is to store the player's transform so we know where the player is. Okay, now in update, type in horizontal equals input dot get axis horizontal, and then transform dot rotate vector 3 dot up times horizontal times speed times time dot delta time. Just our usual transform rotate stuff. And then transform dot position equals player dot position. Okay, so the first two lines are very familiar code just to rotate this object, which of course is camera bin, with the camera inside it, which means that the camera will rotate with it. And the last line is to follow the player by matching the player's position. Alright, so let's save this and click on the camera bin and drag the player object into our player transform field that we just created. Now, if you want to test what we've done just right now without the player moving, then just click on the player and disable its script and then push play. Use your left and right or A and D keys to rotate. Cool. Alright, now we just need to add 2 lines to our player script. So first let's re-enable that player script and open it. Okie dokie. So in here we just need a reference to the camera bin. So let's do public transform camera bin. And then all the movement lines, the add force ones, the transform ones, rem them all out and type in a new line. Player rb dot add force camera bin dot forward times force times vertical. So we are simply adding force in the forward direction of camera bin. So it will travel in the same direction that the camera bin is facing. So let's save this. And click the player object and drag the camera bin object into the transform field that we created. And play. Cool. Now stop the game and move the camera. Not the camera bin, just move the actual main camera into a different position that you would like to see the ball and run it again. There you go, it sticks because the camera's position always stays relative to camera bin. Cool. Alrighty, so now real quick, let's just look at the no way script to follow objects, i.e. no scripting at all. It's called Cinemachine. So firstly, drag the camera back out of camera bin so that it's not a child anymore. And disable the script in camera bin so it won't run and get in the way. And finally jump into the player script and rem out the move line that we just made and re-enable the other two add force lines. And save it. And a quick run just to make sure the ball moves but the camera doesn't. Cool. Now right-click Window and select Package Manager. And up here, select Packages Unity Registry. And then do a search for Cinemachine. Select it and install it. And after install, close the window. And now you can right-click in your hierarchy and you should have a new option of Cinemachine. Select Virtual Camera. Now this system is huge, so we're not going to go through all the settings, but there is always the reference shortcut up here if you want to have a read up on it. But let's just set up one little demo for today. So firstly, drag the player object onto the follow field so that the camera knows what it's following. Then let's drop body down and change transposer to framing transposer. And set X, Y, and Z damping down to 0 to set 0 delay in the follow. And then change the rotation here. You might need to set Y to 0 to make sure that you're behind the player. And change the field of view here. Once you have it set to your preferred view, run it. Cool. No scripting necessary. Alright, I'm going to wrap it up there. There's lots of stuff for you to play with. Like I said earlier, the subject is a big one and there are countless scenarios, so it's best to tackle them as they arise. Script or not to script is somewhat of a preference, but you might also actually have a need for one or the other, or even both. Still finding my way in this YouTube stuff, so who knows, maybe I'll do a series just on cameras. Now, I almost forgot this, but it's pretty important, and I probably would have kicked myself if I'd released a video without it. If you are using script to get your camera to follow, you're probably going to find that sometimes the movement or the screen glitches, or it's a little bit rough. It's not very smooth. This is basically because you have two update methods running. One to move the object, and the other to follow its position. So depending on how many active scripts you're running and other factors, there's a good chance that your camera script is trying to look at the player's position before the player has actually moved. So thus you will get some weird looking stuff sometimes. So consider using LateUpdate in your camera script rather than update. If you remember earlier in the videos, the order of operations, update will run before LateUpdate. If the camera script is LateUpdate, then you're pretty much guaranteed that the camera will update after the player has moved, and it will go a lot smoother. Alrighty, and with that, I am out. So I hope to see you in the next video.